The sound of a shotgun being racked echoed through the empty saloon as Penelope Evans stood her ground, her gray-streaked auburn hair pulled back in a tight bun, and her weathered hands steady on the weapon. At 35, she'd heard it all too old, past her prime, destined to die alone. But right now, all that mattered was protecting the establishment she'd worked at for the past decade from the drunken cowhand threatening to tear it apart. "I suggest you leave before I put a hole in you that the good doctor can't fix," Penelope said, her voice unwavering despite the fear building in her chest. The year was 1875, and Dry Creek, Colorado was a dusty speck on the map caught between the fading gold rush and the expanding cattle empires. The saloon where Penelope worked as both barmaid and bookkeeper had seen better days, much like herself. The cowhand spat on the floor but backed toward the door. "You ain't worth the trouble, old woman," he snarled before stumbling out into the early morning light. Penelope lowered the shotgun and let out a long breath. Her hands trembled now that the danger had passed. She placed the weapon back beneath the bar and surveyed the damaged 3 broken chairs, a shattered bottle of whiskey, and a table flipped on its side. "That's the 3rd time this month," came a voice from the doorway. Bertram Walsh, the saloon owner, shook his head as he entered. "Can't keep a place running if the patrons destroy it faster than we can fix it." "I handled it," Penelope replied, already moving to right the overturned table. "You always do," Bertram sighed, his jowls quivering, "but I'm afraid I've got some news, Penny." She froze. Nobody called her Penny anymore except Bertram, and he only used it when he was about to say something she wouldn't like. "I'm selling the place. Got an offer from a businessman in Denver. He's turning it into one of those fancy establishments with crystal glasses and piano music." Penelope's stomach dropped. "And me?" Bertram couldn't meet her eyes. "New owner wants younger girls, says men come to look at pretty faces, not." He gestured vaguely at her. "Not old spinsters," she finished for him, the words bitter on her tongue. "You've got 2 weeks' pay coming and I'll write you a reference, for what it's worth." 2 weeks. After 10 years of loyalty, of keeping his books straight and his customers in line, she had 2 weeks to figure out what came next in a town where options for women, especially those past their prime, were severely limited. Penelope spent the day cleaning up the mess, serving the few customers who wandered in, and fighting back tears that threatened to fall. She wouldn't cry, not here, not where anyone could see. She had her pride, if little else. As dusk settled over Dry Creek, the saloon door swung open, and a tall figure blocked the fading light. Penelope looked up from wiping down the bar to see a man she didn't recognize, a rarity in a town this size. He stepped inside, removing his hat to reveal dark hair peppered with silver at the temples. His face was tanned and lined from years under the sun, with a neatly trimmed beard that did little to hide a scar that ran along his jaw. His clothes were dusty but of good quality, marking him as someone with means, not just another drifter. "Evening, madam," he said, voice deep and gravelly. "I wonder if you might help me. I'm looking for lodging for myself and my boys." It took Penelope a moment to notice the 2 young men who had followed him in. One looked to be around 20, the other perhaps 18. Both had their father's height and build, though their faces were smoother, unmarked by the years. "Mrs. Miller's boarding house is at the end of the street," Penelope replied. "She usually has rooms available." "We tried there," the younger boy said. "She's full up with some minors passing through." The older man approached the bar. "I'm Wade Sutton. These are my sons, James and Thomas." "Penelope Evans," she replied, automatically extending her hand before remembering it was red and rough from scrubbing floors all afternoon. Wade took it anyway, his grip firm but gentle. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Evans." "Mrs.," she corrected automatically, then flushed. "That is, I was married once. He's long gone now." Wade nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Is there anywhere else in town we might find rooms? We've been on the trail for weeks, moving our herd north." "My boys could use a real bed," Penelope thought for a moment. "The only other place would be above the Mercantile. Mr. Green sometimes rents out his spare room, but it's just the one. We'll make do, Wade said. We've slept in worse conditions. There was something about his steady gaze that made Penelope uncomfortable, not in a threatening way, but because it had been a long time since a man looked at her without immediately dismissing what he saw. I'll send Thomas to inquire, Wade continued. James, go with your brother. I could use a drink after all that dust. The boys nodded and left, their spurs jingling as they walked. Wade settled onto a stool at the bar. Whiskey? Penelope asked, already reaching for a glass. Please. She poured him a generous measure and slid it across the bar. Passing through or planning to stay a while? That depends. Wade took a sip of his drink. I'm looking to settle somewhere. Been on the move since my wife passed 3 years ago. The boys need stability and I need land with good water access for the cattle. There's some properties outside town that might suit, Penelope said. The Harrington place has been empty since old man Harrington died last winter, has a creek running right through it. Wade's eyes lit up with interest. Is it for sale? I reckon his daughter in St. Louis would be happy to sell. She never cared much for ranch life. Penelope found herself adding, it's a good piece of land, solid house too, just needs some care. Much like most worthwhile things, Wade commented, his eyes meeting hers briefly before returning to his drink. The conversation flowed easily after that. Wade told her about his journey from Texas with a small herd of prized cattle, his hopes to establish a breeding operation, and his struggles raising 2 boys alone. Penelope found herself sharing more than she intended about her brief marriage to a man who left for the gold fields and never returned, about working at the saloon to survive, and even about Bertram selling the place. So you're looking for new employment, Wade said thoughtfully. Yes, though at my age, options are limited. Most saloons want younger women who can entice the customers, Wade's brow furrowed. Your age. If you don't mind my asking, how old are you, Mrs. Evans? 35, she admitted, waiting for the dismissive look she'd grown accustomed to. Instead, Wade chuckled. I've got 10 years on you at least. If you're old, what does that make me? Before she could respond, the saloon door opened again and James and Thomas returned. Mr. Green says we can have the room for $2 a night, James reported, but it's small, Pa. We'll manage, Wade said, finishing his whiskey. Thank you for the conversation, Mrs. Evans. Perhaps you could point us toward the Harrington property tomorrow. I'd like to have a look before contacting the daughter. I get off at noon, Penelope heard herself saying. I could take you there myself. Wade's smile made the corners of his eyes crinkle. I'd appreciate that very much. After they left, Penelope realized she had smiled more in that one conversation than she had in months. She told herself not to read anything into it. Wade Sutton was just being polite, and tomorrow he'd probably have forgotten all about her offer to show him the property. But the next day at precisely noon, Wade arrived alone at the saloon, riding a handsome chestnut gelding and leading a second horse. The boys are checking on the herd, he explained. I hope you don't mind riding. I borrowed this mare from the livery. The owner said she's gentle. Penelope hadn't been on a horse in years, but she wasn't about to admit it. That's fine. The ride to the Harrington place took nearly an hour, giving them plenty of time to talk. Wade asked about her life before Dry Creek, and Penelope found herself telling him about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, about her dreams of becoming a schoolteacher before circumstances forced her to marry young. Do you regret it? Wade asked. Marrying so young. Penelope considered the question. I regret marrying a man who saw me as something to possess rather than a partner. When the gold fever hit him, he was quick enough to leave me behind. His loss, Wade said simply. The Harrington property was just as Penelope remembered, a sturdy 2-story house with a wide porch, a large barn, and several outbuildings spread across rolling grassland with a clear creek cutting through it. Parts of the fence needed repair and the house could use fresh paint, but the bones of the place were good. Wade walked the property methodically, checking the water flow, examining the soil, inspecting the structures. Penelope found herself seeing it through his eyes not as an abandoned homestead, but as a place with potential, a place where a family could thrive. "It's perfect," Wade finally declared. "How do I contact the daughter?" "Sheriff keeps the records of property owners. He can help you send a telegram." On the ride back, they took a different route that passed by a small, sheltered valley filled with wildflowers. Wade suggested they stop to rest the horses, and they sat on a fallen log, sharing the lunch Penelope had packed: just bread, cheese, and apples, but Wade acted as if it were a feast. "My wife never much cared for the outdoors," Wade said suddenly. "Caroline was a town girl. She tried to make a go of ranch life for my sake, but her heart was never in it. After she died, I realized I'd been selfish, keeping her out there when she was so unhappy." "I'm sure she loved you," Penelope said softly. "Sometimes we make sacrifices for the people we care about. What about you? Do you like town life or would you prefer something else?" The question caught her off guard. "I've never really thought about it. I go where work takes me." "And if you could choose, if work wasn't a concern," Penelope looked around at the valley, at the mountains in the distance, at the clear blue sky. "I'd like space to breathe, a garden of my own, maybe some chickens." She smiled self-consciously. "Simple things." "The simplest things often bring the most joy," Wade replied. When they returned to town, Wade insisted on buying her dinner at the small cafe near the general store. Penelope tried to decline, aware of the curious glances from townspeople, but Wade was persistent. "Please, I've enjoyed your company today. Let me thank you properly." Over dinner, they discussed books they'd read, places they'd seen, and dreams they still harbored. Penelope couldn't remember the last time she'd had such a conversation, one that made her feel seen and heard, rather than merely tolerated. As days passed, Wade became a regular at the saloon during Penelope's shifts. He'd purchased the Harrington place for a fair price and was busy making repairs, but he always found time to visit. Sometimes his sons accompanied him, and Penelope grew to enjoy their company as well. James was serious and thoughtful, while Thomas had a quick wit that often made her laugh. A week before Penelope's employment was to end, Wade came to the saloon alone, looking unusually serious. "I need to ask a favor," he said without preamble. "Of course," Penelope replied, setting aside the glasses she'd been polishing. "The boys and I have made progress on the house, but there's still much to do. The cattle need attention, fences need mending, and none of us knows the first thing about making a house comfortable." He took a deep breath. "I'd like to hire you, Mrs. Evans. As a housekeeper, cook, whatever you'd like to call it. You'd have your own room, of course, and fair wages." Penelope stared at him, speechless. It was a practical solution to both their problems. He needed help and she needed employment, yet something about it felt disappointing. "I understand if you'd prefer not to," Wade added quickly. "It's a fair distance from town and you might have other plans." "No," Penelope said. "I mean, yes, I'll accept your offer. I don't have other prospects and I've always been good at running a household." Relief washed over Wade's face. "Excellent. The boys will be pleased. They've grown quite fond of you." "And I of them," Penelope replied truthfully. What she didn't say was how fond she'd grown of their father, to a fondness she knew better than to nurture. 2 days later, Wade arrived with a wagon to collect Penelope and her few possessions. The drive to what would now be her home was quiet, with Wade seeming lost in thought and Penelope trying to temper her expectations. This was a job, nothing more. The fact that her heart beat faster whenever Wade smiled at her was irrelevant. The house was in better shape than when they'd first visited, with fresh paint on the exterior and repaired steps leading to the porch. Inside, though, it was clear that 3 men had been living, bachelor-style clothes strewn about, dishes piled in the sink, dust on every surface. "I warned you," Wade said apologetically. "Nothing I can't handle," Penelope assured him, already rolling up her sleeves. She spent the rest of the day cleaning and organizing, taking stock of what supplies they had and what they needed. By evening, She had prepared a simple but hearty stew, and the four of them sat around the table for their first meal together. "This is the best food we've had in months," Thomas declared, reaching for a second helping. "Pa's cooking usually tastes like leather," James added with a grin. "Show some respect," Wade scolded, but his eyes were twinkling. "Mrs. Evans, this is delicious, thank you." "Please call me Penelope," she said, "or Penny if you prefer. Mrs. Evans seems too formal if I'm to be living here." "Penny," Wade repeated, as if testing the name. "It suits you." Days turned into weeks, and Penelope settled into a routine. She rose early to prepare breakfast, spent mornings cleaning and tending to the vegetable garden she'd started, prepared lunch, and in the afternoons either worked on mending clothes or baked bread and desserts that the men devoured appreciatively. Evenings were for dinner, and then often reading aloud from one of the books Wade had brought with him, or sometimes just talking as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. It was a good life, Penelope realized better than she'd had in years. The men treated her with respect, appreciated her work, and included her in their conversations and plans. Wade frequently sought her opinion on matters related to the ranch, valuing her practical nature and eye for detail. Yet as comfortable as she became, Penelope maintained a careful distance. She was their housekeeper, not family. She ate with them but retired to her room early to give them privacy. She kept her thoughts and feelings guarded, especially the growing attraction she felt toward Wade. One evening, about 2 months after she'd moved to the ranch, Penelope was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she overheard the men talking on the porch. "You should tell her, Pa," Thomas was saying. "Tell her what?" Wade's voice replied. "That you're sweet on her," James chimed in. "It's plain as day to everyone but her." Penelope froze, the wet shirt in her hands dripping onto her skirts. "It's not that simple," Wade sighed. "Penny sees herself as our employee. She's made it clear she values her independence." "So offer her something better than employment," Thomas suggested. "And if she refuses, if she leaves, have you considered that?" "Have you considered that she might feel the same way?" James countered. "The way she looks at you when you're not watching, it's the same way you look at her." Penelope's heart was pounding so loudly she was sure they could hear it. She quietly set down her laundry basket and slipped around the side of the house, not wanting to eavesdrop further but unable to face them just yet. She walked to the creek, her mind racing. Wade had feelings for her. It seemed impossible. Men like him didn't fall for women like her women considered past their prime, with no fortune or family connections to recommend them. Yet hadn't she noticed the way his hand lingered when passing her a dish at dinner? The way he sought out her company, sitting beside her on the porch long after the boys had gone to bed. The way his eyes followed her around a room. Penelope sat on a rock by the water's edge, trying to sort through her emotions. If Wade did have feelings for her, what then? She'd been hurt before, abandoned by a husband who'd promised to love her forever. Could she risk her heart again? And if she did, would she be risking this peaceful life she'd built here as well? Lost in thought, she didn't hear the approaching footsteps until Wade spoke. "Penny." "Are you all right?" She looked up, startled. "Yes, I just needed some air." Wade sat beside her on the rock, careful to leave space between them. "It's a beautiful evening." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the last rays of sunlight dance on the water. "I've been meaning to talk to you," Wade finally said, "about your position here." Penelope's stomach tightened. "Is there a problem with my work?" "No, nothing like that. Your work is excellent, better than we deserve." He cleared his throat. "The thing is, I don't want you to be our housekeeper anymore." "Oh." The word came out small and hurt despite her best efforts. Wade must have heard it because he quickly turned to face her. "That came out wrong. What I mean is..." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I'm making a mess of this." "Perhaps you should just say what you mean plainly," Penelope suggested, her heart hammering in her chest. Wade took a deep breath. "I care for you, Penny, more than as a housekeeper or even a friend. I find myself thinking about you when we're apart, looking forward to our conversations, admiring your strength and your kindness." The boys adore you too. This place hasn't felt like a home until you came into it. Penelope stared at him, speechless. I know you've been hurt before, Wade continued when she didn't respond. I know you value your independence, and I know I'm asking a lot, but would you consider staying here not as our housekeeper but as my wife? The world seemed to still around them. Penelope could hear nothing but the soft gurgle of the creek and her own thundering heartbeat. You want to marry me, she finally managed. More than anything, Wade replied softly. But only if it's what you want to. I won't press you or rush you. Take all the time you need to consider. Penelope looked at this man, this kind, thoughtful man who had brought her into his home and his life, who looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world despite her age, despite her past, despite everything. People will talk, she said. They'll say you could do better. That I'm too old. That Wade's hand covered hers, warm and reassuring. Let them talk. I know what I want, who I want. Age is just a number, Penny. It's the heart that matters, and yours is the most beautiful I've ever known. Tears welled in Penelope's eyes. I care for you too. So much that it frightens me sometimes. Then we can be frightened together, Wade said with a gentle smile. That's what partners do, face life's challenges side by side. Partners, Penelope repeated, liking the sound of it. Not master and servant, not provider and dependent, but equals. Nothing less, Wade promised, though I can't claim to be your equal in cooking or keeping a tidy house. That made her laugh, breaking the tension. I suppose I'll have to keep doing those things then. Only if you want to. We can figure out together how to make this work for all of us. He squeezed her hand. Is that a yes, Penny? Will you stay forever, not as our housekeeper, but as my wife and the boys' stepmother? Instead of answering with words, Penelope leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but deepened as Wade pulled her closer. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Wade rested his forehead against hers. I'll take that as a yes. Yes, Penelope whispered. Yes, I'll stay forever. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Dry Creek. James and Thomas stood beside their father, both grinning widely as Penelope walked down the aisle in a new blue dress that Wade had insisted on buying for her. The townspeople were indeed surprised, some skeptical, others openly disapproving, but Penelope found she cared less than she'd expected. The happiness she felt drowned out their whispers. As husband and wife, Penelope and Wade built a life together that exceeded both their dreams. The ranch prospered under their joint care, with Penelope proving to have a knack for breeding livestock that complemented Wade's skills with land management. James eventually married the daughter of a neighboring rancher and built a house on the property, while Thomas went east to study veterinary medicine before returning to apply his knowledge to the family business. On their first anniversary, Wade presented Penelope with a gift, a sign he'd carved himself to hang beside their front door. It read, Sutton Family Ranch EST, 1875. This is when our family truly began, he explained, when you came into our lives. Penelope, now 36 and more content than she'd ever imagined possible, wrapped her arms around her husband. The best decision I ever made was saying yes to you. The best decision I ever made was asking, Wade replied, kissing her forehead. Though I still think I got the better end of the deal. As they stood on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Penelope reflected on how life had changed. A year ago, she'd been told she was too old, unwanted, with limited prospects. Now she was loved, respected, and essential to the thriving ranch and family around her. What are you thinking about? Wade asked, his arm warm around her waist. About how sometimes the end of one road leads to the beginning of a better one, Penelope replied. And how grateful I am that mine led me to you. In the years that followed, whenever newcomers expressed surprise at their marriage, usually after learning Penelope's age, Wade would simply smile and say, I asked the best woman I know to stay forever, and by some miracle, she said yes. And Penelope, who had once believed her chance at happiness had passed her by, would squeeze his hand and marvel at how wrong she'd been. Age, she'd learned, was indeed just a number. What mattered was finding someone who saw not how many years you'd lived, but how much love you had to give. In the end, it wasn't about being young or old. It was about being exactly who you were meant to be with exactly who you were meant to be with. And for Penelope and Wade, that meant each other now and forever.